Before I start, just check the microphone's loud enough for everybody can hear me. Right, so this afternoon I'm going to talk to you about excavations which the Cornwall Archaeological Unit carried out on Whitehorse Hill back in 2011. Now, the Cist is located pretty much on the highest part of the moor, in one of the most remotest areas, down there. It's about 600 metres above sea level in the middle of the Army firing range, so at many parts of the year you can't actually get to it at all. The nearest vehicular access is about 3/4 of a mile away. The hill is very long and broad, and it has a summit at either end. It's one of about 1,000 known barrows, kists, cairns, early Bronze Age ceremonial monuments which are known on Dartmoor, but it's the highest that's so far been found. So this is a Lidar image showing the top of the hill. It's got two summits. The northern summit is a barrow up here that's called the Hanging Stonehill Cairn. The Whitehorse Cist occupies a rather similar topographical position at the southern end. The majority of the hill was covered by a blanket of peat. On the southern end, where our site is, you probably can notice some flattening here on the Lidar. That's been caused by peat cutting. And this very dark channel here, this isn't a river. This is the peat cut track, which is put in by peat cutters to get up there. So that means our mound is very much standing as an island within a flattened area. And we can see this here on this slide. This is taken from the Hanging Stonehill Cairn, which is 700 metres or so to the north. If we look back, we see on the skyline there the mound with the Cist in it. It looks like a skyline barrow, but in actuality we don't know how prominent the mound was in prehistory because of the peat cutting that's taken place around it. In fact, ours weren't the first investigations or recording of the site to have taken place. In fact, it had been noted and photographed in the late 1990s. There was a slide here at the bottom and it had been recorded by an amateur archaeologist by the name of Joe Turner and published in 2000 in the Devon Archaeological Proceedings. You can see his section and profile here. Now, this early recording actually steered our expectations of the site, because what was suggested was that this stone on the bottom here was actually the base stone. Where you can see the greenery behind, that was interpreted as being the back edge. So it was interpreted, the site was interpreted as being 3/4 fallen out of the peat mound already. So it was considered to be a largely ruinous site. And indeed, when English Heritage went up to do some recording in about 2005, they concentrated entirely on the peat mound and took samples. These are their environmental sample tins from the peat column in order to recover information about the environmental history into which the Cist was set. And they obtained two radiocarbon determinations, one from approximately level with the base of the Cist down here, which fell in the Middle Neolithic period, and then another one approximately level with the top, which fell in the early Bronze Age. Now at that point, the National Park decided that the best strategy would be to try and preserve the site in situ. So they constructed a dry stone wall across the face of the peat mound, which you can see here. Unfortunately, peat shrinkage on the high moors has continued over the throughout the 2000s, and this was also coupled with several hard winters. This caused the wall to collapse, and you can see at this end, for example, the stones of the wall were collapsing. So faced with the possibility, very great likelihood that the site was going to collapse, the National Park commissioned us to undertake some archaeological excavation of the site with funding from English Heritage. Before we got up there was a very detailed survey of the site which was made by Phil Newman. You can see here the peat mound, and our site, the actual Cist, sits in the southwest corner of that mound. And here we are, September 2011. We cut back the section. The mound's about 12 metres in diameter, about 1.5 metres high. And we pretty quickly realised that the mound is actually entirely artificial in shape. So as I say, we don't know how prominent this mound was in prehistory. However, I do think it's likely that there was a slight swelling there at least, because if you look beyond where the peat cutting is taking place, into the areas of the blanket peat, there are natural tumps, little hummocks in the blanket peat. And I like to think that perhaps our site was selected because it was a slight hummock in the peat. So we cut back the section I said. We started recording in a traditional archaeological manner, and we, Sean, Taylor and myself, issued context numbers. Luckily we had an environmentalist with us, an environmental archaeologist from the University of Plymouth, who pointed out that our stratigraphy was little more than the drying out of the peat, so it's just reflecting natural dampness in the peat. So you can ignore the context numbers on there. It's entirely natural peat development. The Cist itself is about 0.8 long by about 0.7 wide and 0.3 high. It's constructed like most Cists of side stones, and there's a basal stone, which you can see at the bottom there, and a large capstone on top. The side stones were a little unusual because on most Cists, what they're trying to achieve is a rectangular box, and they have very squared or rectangular stones. The side stones on this one, as you can see some examples down the bottom here, were predominantly sort of tooth-shaped, and they have their tapering ends wedged down to the peat. And we think that's because this site's in the peat rather than in a barrow mound or cairn. They use these shaped stones to get a better bite and give the site better stability. So here's the site fully exposed in the section. Interestingly, it's oriented northwest, southeast, and that fits in with about 95% of all Dartmoor Cists. And this does seem to be a regional tradition which is pretty much unique to Dartmoor. You've only got to move a few kilometres to the west into Cornwall, and there's no orientation, no fixed orientation on Cists at all. This seems to be a Dartmoor preference. The original shape of the Cist is difficult to be entirely sure of, because being in the peat mound, what has happened is the side stones have got pushed out of place. They've been compressed by being in the peat mound. But we think it likely that it would have been more or less rectangular or square, more or less squarish when it was originally constructed. Now we had hoped to detect whether there was a cut to hold the Cist in the mound. We couldn't make that out in the peat. Peat's just too plastic to be able to see any cuts into it. However, we think it's entirely unlikely that the site could have ever been freestanding. It would have collapsed long before the peat grew up around it. And then we did some soil micromorphological work on the side of the section here, and this indicated that the peat sequence adjacent to the Cist had been disturbed. And we think that's where the edge of the cut would have been. The soil micromorphology was very useful for a second reason. You can see these tins here where they've taken the samples there. If you look on this lower slide, you'll see there's a dark band. That isn't peat, that's actually a soil development. And this means that the capstone of the Cist had been left clear of the peat mound, long enough at least for a soil layer to start growing upon it. So this seems to have been left as an exposed stone in the landscape, so it would have been visible after the Cist was completed. Returning to the mound itself, as I said, the section is entirely natural and has grown up over several thousand years, and that means it holds a wealth of environmental material within it. One of the things that it held was tephra, and tephra is layers of volcanic dust, basically, that comes out of an eruption, which is deposited through volcanic eruptions. We had 9, these triangles indicate the horizons from this is the bottom, that's the top of the mound. There were 9 of these eruptions captured within the mound. Now, had we been able to identify them, they would have been very useful for very precisely dating where our Cist was. We can see that's the approximate position of our Cist there, and it's got these tephra layers either side of it. Unfortunately, only 3 of them were characterised. There's 2 at the very bottom. These relate to the leg eruptions, and means they fall in the Mesolithic period. So, and then there's another one above it here, which is also characterised, and that falls in the earlier Iron Age. So not terribly helpful for the purposes of dating at the moment, but hopefully there will come a time when these do become identified. We also carried out test date amoebae and pollen work as well. These have both sort of given very similar results. Test date amoebae are little animals that tell you how wet and dry an environment is. And these, together with the pollen, show that the environment was becoming drier throughout the Bronze Age, and by the time, roughly about the time the Cist was constructed, the grassland was predominating on top of the hill. Further away, we know from other projects that there's woodland on the lower slopes. And then we also had fungal spores, which these are very interesting because these grow on decayed animal dung and are associated with grazing animals. And we don't know if they're sheep or not, but because you can't tell the actual species of the animal from the fungal spores. But certainly there seems to have been a rise in grazing animals from around about the time the Cist was constructed. So it does seem that as people were going to be more frequently engaging with the hilltop and using it, so this burial seems to have gone in. It seems to be linked in with that broadly. But to return to the archaeology, we cut back the top of the mound, and at this point we had a very nice surprise because, as I mentioned earlier, we had thought that about 85% of the site had gone. When we cut off the peak from above it, we realised that it was about 95% actually intact, and that the stone, which had been thought to be the base stone, was actually one of the side stones which had been pressed out of the true. So we had an intact site. We lifted off the capstone at this point, but even now, even at this point, we still decided that we were going to go ahead with an environmental recording strategy for the interior of the Cist. And this is because there's been about 130 excavations of barrows and cairns and kists on Dartmoor since the 1800s. But out of all those excavations, there is something like 26 sites with flints, and once you get past the Beaker period, about 6 with pottery. So we thought the most important information that we were likely to get from the site was more information about the environment at the time the Cist was constructed. Instead of this layer of grey material we can see here, that's actually where the capstone's been in contact with the peat inside the Cist. So we started going down in spits through the layer. These are the environmental team, and then almost immediately one of them said that she'd come across a sort of type of seed that she'd never seen before, except for when we looked at it more closely, it's actually in fact shale disc bead. We then cleaned up the area around, and you can see cremated bone here, and also this ginger material, which we thought this time could be hair or possibly fur. But we decided not to excavate any more on site from the interior of the Cist. And instead, we then cut round the exterior of the site into the peat mound. That proved to be very worthwhile because we had 2 hazel stakes, one lying prone at one back corner here, and another one at the other back corner stone, running down the back stone there. And these proved useful because they've both been radiocarbon dated. They both fall in the same period, 1875 to 1690 CalBC. We believe that these were associated with the marking out of the site for its construction. It's possible there would have been 2 more stakes, of course, closer to the edge of the mound, but these obviously wouldn't have survived because they'd have dried out, desiccated a long time ago. Now, as I said, we decided we weren't going to excavate the contents of the Cist on site. So what we did was we cut out the base stone, and then you can see it, the wheelbarrow here, wrapped up in cling film. And then we had about 3/4 of a mile taking turns pushing it back down the peat track to the Land Rover, which was an interesting exercise. But a worthwhile one, and it's probably the best call in my career so far, because everything you're going to see from now on excuse me, is the result of Helen Williams' very detailed micro-excavation work in Chippenham in Wiltshire. And you can see here, these are just a list of all the things that she recovered, and we'll go through these now from bottom to top. So if we start at the bottom, what we found was that there was a layer of matted plant material. This, on analysis, has turned out to be grasses. These are purple moorgrass. 90% of it is purple moorgrass. This grows on the moor today, actually on the top of the hill today. The life cycle that it's at suggests that it was collected in the late summer, and this has also been supported by the analyses of the pollen as well, which meadowsweet pollen from the interior of the Cist as well, which have also been flowering roughly about the same time of year. And then we have the first artefact sitting directly on top of that matted plant layer. It's this is how it initially came out. It's a bit difficult to see exactly what it's in. You can see there's a band of material here, and it's actually two different types of materials stitched together. It's animal and plant material, and this is the first composite item to have been recovered from a British Bronze Age context. Here it is after Helen has conserved it. You can see more clearly here this is the plant strip of plant material. This has actually now been identified as nettle, and then attached to it you've got this seam of animal skin with these triangles like fringes on it. This has now been identified as calf skin. It may have had actually calf skin on the underside as well, but animal skin doesn't survive terribly well in the environment in the Cist. This is a reconstruction which was done for Plymouth Museum at the recent exhibition. It's just a section of the object. So you can see here this is the nettle skin and then the animal skin on either side. We did one side was dyed and one side was undyed because we weren't able to detect whether actually it had been the animal skin had been dyed or not. We're not entirely sure what it is. As I said, it could have had a backing on it, in which case it could be part of a garment. But the other possibility is, and I think it's the one that's favoured by the specialists, is it's more likely to be some kind of sash or belt. And as such, the nearest example of this would be the kinds of things which come out of log coffin burials in Denmark. We had one copper alloy object from the site. This came from on top of the pelt which held the cremation. There was a bit of speculation about what this was at first. There was two interpretations. One was that there was an awl, and the other was that it was a pin. And in actual fact, closer analysis indicates it's a pin, it's got a twisted shank, which of course an awl wouldn't have. It's interesting because there's only one other copper alloy pin from Devon, from Upton Pine. There are none at all from Cornwall, where the nearest things are awls which have been found with burials. And there are 3 or 4 from Wessex of this particular type, so it's probably a high status dress item. The pelt itself, here it is, was folded over, held the cremation, and this is it conserved. It's a large rectangular piece from a fairly large animal. It's 56 centimetres by 39. It's from the hindquarters, so it's the best part of the pelt. It's the highest quality part. So again, it's a high status artefact. It's been radiocarbon dated to 1740, 1530 BC. The one problem it gave us was actually what was it, because we tried DNA, we couldn't undertake DNA on it because the hair doesn't work well with the DNA, and there wasn't enough skin on the underside to do it from that either. We had various suggestions for what it could be. However, almost at the last minute, we tried a different sort of analysis, looking at the keratins, and this revealed that it was a bear. Now we can't tell what kind of bear it is, but we can say it's bear family, but given we're in temperate Europe, it's likely to be brown bear rather than a polar bear. We don't know whether it's local or not. It could be a traded item. We've got other artefacts which we'll come to in a minute, which are certainly from a considerable distance away. But I quite like the idea of it being a darker bear. We certainly know that in other parts of Britain, bears that survived clung on until certainly to the Roman period. So perhaps in the Bronze Age they were more widely spread and still clinging on to upland areas of the southwest of England as well. There was a cremation inside that. It's very poorly preserved. It's a single individual. We can't determine the sex, although the other artefacts with it do suggest a female. The person seems to have been about 15 to 25 years old. It's less than complete. There's only about a third of an individual here. That is actually entirely in keeping with other burials in the southwest. There seems to be far less emphasis in the Bronze Age on collecting up whole bodies in the southwest of England than there was, say, in Wessex, where the cremations are generally much larger. Again, we've radiocarbon dated this to 1930, 1750 KBC. Now, you'll see on that last slide there was some pieces of charcoal in that. We've had the charcoal analysed. It's mostly oak. There's a bit of hazel, but it's, I think, something like 90% oak. There were no oak trees growing up on top of Dartmoor at this stage, although they were on the lower slopes and certainly in the valleys. So I think it's likely, given the quantity of wood which had been required to cremate the individual, it's likely that it was done, the person was cremated off-site and then was carried up to the top of the hill as a cremated bundle. We found within the charcoal there was one piece here which the wood specialist has suggested may have been worked. If it is a piece from a wooden artefact, it is the only object from the Cist to have gone through the cremation, to have gone through the funeral pyre. There were, however, a few fragments of textile found with the bone, and this implies that the individual had been wrapped in a shroud or was wearing a garment when they were burnt. Now, beside our pelt, there was a basketry container. This is it. It was completely flattened. There was an attached fragment, which we've radiocarbon dated to 1870 to 1620 BC. This has proved to be interesting. Well, this is again Helen's work as conserving this. This has proved to be interesting. It's in three pieces, three sections. There's a tubular section and two end pieces. The basketry itself is made from lime bast, and that's a very interesting choice of material to have gone for, because it's well, A, the lime trees don't grow that frequently in the southwest, far more common on the chalk. But it's an interesting choice because it's far harder to turn into basketry than, say, willow or hazel, materials like that. To get to lime bast, you have to you can only harvest the bark of the tree in June, I think June or July, when the sap's at the right level. You then have to soak it or wet it in water for a minimum of 6 weeks before the fibres are able to be extracted to start actually working with. So it's a far more complicated process than using other materials. One property it does have, though, is that it provides a water-resistant material. And having worked on Dartmoor now in less than dry conditions, that may have been an advantage to people who wanted to keep their possessions dry. The other thing to point out about it is that the panels are joined together used by animal hair. In this case, it was which has now been identified as cattle hair. And the top section wasn't quite stitched round, so it was left as a lid. So it had a kind of it was a lidded basket. Here's the reconstruction of it. In the background, you can see the original as is. This is the Sherry Doyle's reconstruction. You can see interestingly, the cattle hair seems to form the kind of decorative element around it. This is made without the lid on top. Again, there are no direct surviving examples of this type of object from the British Bronze Age, and again, you'd have to be looking to Ireland from some of their bog finds or from the Danish log coffin burials to get anything close to it. We could see immediately when it was on the stone that it was there were artifacts within it. This is the base stone behind. We can see there were beads spilling out the ends of it. So we sent it off to Mary Davis at the National Museum of Cardiff to try various clever Xray techniques on it to see what was inside and see some results here of her work. It's very good software. This is looking right in the middle of the bag, and we can see that it was full of artifacts. And from this stage also, Helen started making a very detailed record of everything, the position of everything in the bag as she excavated it, so that because this would be really very helpful following on to when we started to think about how the necklace from the site was put together. Anyway, the first artifact to come out was what's been called the woven band or wristband. This is it after conservation. It was made from braided strands of animal hair. At first we thought this might be horse hair because they were so long, the strands. But in actual fact, we haven't found this identified, and it's turned out to be cattle hair. And then set within the cattle hair were these studs. There were 32 of these, and again, these gave us initially, we weren't entirely sure what these were initially. We were speculating in the fact that it could be cremated bone or something like that, because they really looked like pieces of broken indigestion tablets or something like that. It was not very spectacular to look at. But we had them X-rayed, and we had XRF analysis undertaken upon them, and it soon became very clear that these were actual fact made of tin. This is very nice on this piece here. There simply is nothing like this. There were no jewellery items like this known from the British context. Tin is incredibly rare, in any case, unalloyed in the British Bronze Age. This is a reconstruction of that artefact which Linda Herken undertook, and it's worth pointing out, I think, that when you see the original, it's really the braiding that stands out as being the most impressive thing, the amount of hours it was taken to braid it. However, when you look at the reconstruction, you realise when it was newly made, in actual fact it was the tin which stood out as these beads, and they really do shine, especially when worn against the skin. In addition, we also had 2 pairs of wooden studs. The larger pair, which is at this side of the slide, those are thought to be ear studs, and the smaller pair here, these are thought to be the breadths. There's a possibility, in fact, these could be ear studs as well. They could have been used to sort of expand the hole in the earlobe. But our specialist who's looked at these, Alison Sheridan, she thinks the profile is wrong for that, and it's much more likely that they were going through the cheeks or perhaps the lip, or somewhere else in the body which you'd care to have pierced. They were made from spindle wood, which grows locally. And interestingly, we've got a radiocarbon date of 2200 to 1980 from these. And this is particularly interesting because the analysis also showed that these were turned. So these were turned on a pole lathe, rather than being carved, which is what they initially thought. And that's actually put wood turning back several centuries back into the early Bronze Age. And here's just some examples of different kinds of piercing with similar kinds of objects. The guy on the top, I think, that is the kind of modern British tablet. That's about the same size as the Whitehorse Hill, the larger Whitehorse Hill ear stud. The basket also contained a flint flake. I think it's worth flagging this up. It was worked. There's this, you can see edge damage on here. So it was a used piece of flint. But it's worth pointing out, because I mentioned earlier on in the talk that 26 sites or so have turned up flints, and nothing but flints. Had the Whitehorse Cist been in different environmental conditions, had it not been in the peat mound, we'd have had this, and we had a few beads that we'll come to next, and that would have been pretty much it for the site. So I think it's a salutary reminder of just how much we've lost from the archaeological record. But back to the remainder of the contents of the necklace, of the basket. It also contained a very large number of beads belonging to a composite necklace, and this is only the 3rd composite necklace to have been found in Devon. There are around about 210 beads in it. In order of magnitude, there is one bead of tin, although there was possibly a second one, and I'll come to that in a bit. 7 of amber, 92 of shale, and 110 of clay. So starting with the tin bead, again, we didn't know what the material was originally when we first looked at it, when it was before conservation, but we did get XRF and had a very definite spike for tin in it. You can see it standing out in the Xray down the bottom there. It's only the second ever tin bead to be found in the United Kingdom. There was one found by Colt Hall, Sutton Vane in Wiltshire in the early 1800s, but that's now lost. As I said, tin is almost always alloyed with copper to form bronze. It's almost never left unalloyed in Britain. Now there are these, see this clustered-like effect here. These are bits of tin, and we think it's possible that there was a second tin bead in this in the basket, but for some reason it's fallen apart. We don't quite know why that would have occurred. So here it is. It's very simply made. It's just basically a tube that's been folded round. The tin is probably from southwest England, given that's where it naturally occurs, its natural source. Unfortunately, the sources on Dartmoor have not been well enough characterised to be able to establish whether this was made from Dartmoor tin or from tin from Cornwall. Rather further afield, we have the amber beads. These originally came from the Baltic, of course, but they were probably, in our case, obtained from people in Wessex, because that's where the largest concentration of them are. But it's still 180 kilometres from the Whitehorse Hill Cist, so it's not immediately adjacent. So there was 4 of the smaller chunky type, and we have 3 of these larger cylindrical examples. These have proved to be very interesting. Alison Sheridan's work on this has proved to be very interesting because just these have revealed that the amber beads, at least, weren't new when they were put onto the necklace. These show signs. You can see this one here, for example, shows signs of breaks, bits missing, and others have got striations from wear. So it seems that these were second-hand when they ended up on our necklace. We also had shale beads. These here, these are all much similar shape except for one, which is very much larger, and we think that is the fastener. We've had these beads sourced. They come from Dorset. They come from Wessex again. This time Dorset on the south Dorset coast. Sorry, from Cambridge on the south Dorset coast. These, unlike the amber beads, these ones show no obvious signs of wear upon them. So it's very likely that actually these were acquired for use in our necklace. And lastly, we have around about 110. These clay beads, so probably more because there are bits of clay, fragments of clay in the basket. These were locally made. They're granitic clays and almost certainly collected from a stream on Dartmoor. Very simply made, just a hole pushed through them and then baked. The interesting thing about them is that on one of the segments of the necklace which is actually intact, they seem to have been placed in between the shale beads. So it looks as if they were trying to bulk out they're trying to make it look a richer necklace than it really was by sort of mixing in a bit of locally sourced material in with the more exotic stuff. This is Alison and Henrietta Quinnell's reconstruction of the necklace using a selected proportion of beads. But you can see it was graded from dark to light with this tin centrepiece there. Interestingly, there's another necklace from Devon and Upton Pine which uses a very similar colour scheme. And then this is the necklace as reconstructed for the recent BBC television programme. But again, it gives this kind of gives you the impression that gradation of colour, especially with the amber being very much lighter, it's gone darker red through being in the sort of peaty soil. It probably started off in this colour, and then it's giving a truer impression of what the tin bead would look like when it was first made. And then finally, there was a second layer of matted plant material placed upon the top of the kist. We can't identify the species, so we can't identify the plant types associated with this because they're just too badly degraded. So finally, I'll just sort of wrap up with what we know. So we now know that the person is likely to be female. She was cremated between 1900 and 1700 Cal BC. This is likely to have occurred away from the Whitehorse Cist, and that she'd been wrapped in a garment or in a shroud prior to burning. We can also say that the place of the burial was marked, or the Cist was constructed, and I think this is likely to have been a low mound, natural mound in the peat in a grazed area. The base of the Cist was lined, after the Cist was constructed, it was lined with moor grasses, and these have been collected from the surrounding area in the late summer. And the cremation was brought up, wrapped up in the bear pelt, which was probably secured together with the pin, and that was placed in. And then beside that, the majority of the artefacts were placed inside a basketry container. That includes the necklace, the wristband, the wooden studs, and the flint. And then this was lowered in next to the pelt. And then finally, the Cist was covered by a very large and distinctive slab of granite, which was left exposed long enough for a soil to develop over it. This means that it would have remained a marked place in the landscape. And finally, I'd just like to thank that we have an awful lot of specialists on here, and I'm not going to read out everybody's names. We've had a remarkable team of people working on so many different aspects. I think we've had more different disciplines working on this one small site than any other site I can think of, actually. But I just draw out Vanessa Straker and Jane Marchand, who both helped me steer this project through to publication, and we're hoping that will be out either the end of this year or earlier next year. Thank you very much.